We have a lot of hypocrisy around climate policy. So for 2 years now, we've seen the representatives we have in Brussels and all of the main government and opposition parties sit idly by and allow the commentariat to drive an agenda to cut the national herd. Europe seems to be going along with this. And then they're also trying to negotiate deals with South America to import beef to replace what we should be producing. That's not climate policy. That's carbon leakage, or in layman's terms, that's hypocrisy.
The National Council for Curriculum and Assessment were proposing a kind of sustainability module in schools, and this would include all sorts of measures that they would teach school children, including how to effectively be a climate activist, lobbying, and how to, engage in civil disobedience and study the tactics of activists to get the message about climate change out there. Would you have any thoughts on things like that?
I have a huge concern about this. There is a small, unrepresentative cabal of academics, some people in the media, telling us how to live, what to think, what to eat, and what to drive. It is not representative of the feelings of people in all of the constituency that I am a candidate in. I am deeply concerned that ideology is being driven into our schools across a whole range of issues, and I don't know where there is a mandate for that. It's the same thing in Brussels. We had a plant protein strategy, which was really about growing more protein crops, a sensible policy in Europe, and suddenly out of nowhere, a paragraph in encouraging the citizens to move to a plant-based diet. We listen too much to misinformation, and misinformation is the word because I've studied this in detail about how red meat should be cut back on. The WHO tried to find a link between red meat and cancer. It wasn't found, but we keep hearing this misinformation being driven out. We had the Eat Lancet report, which was again saying 1 sausage per week is as much as you can have. I have debated this, and it is wrong information. But there's an ideology driving that. There is no mandate for it. But unfortunately, we have our main political parties sitting idly by, acquiescing in this. Leo Varadkar said he was cutting back on meat for the planet and for his health. As a doctor, he knows that's not correct. And there is no evidence either that Ireland cutting back in its national herd will do one thing to reduce global warming. We need facts and information. The emissions out of peatlands were grossly, by a factor of almost 3, overstated. And the nature restoration law, which our government continues to push, was based on completely wrong information. We're not even talking about the science says. There was no science in the first place. In the last number of weeks, the EPA admits what those of us who had been paying attention knew for a long time, that it was ridiculous to re-wet the land that generations of farmers had worked to bring it to its current state based on misinformation. We often get accused of misinformation in the farming community, but the facts are that a lot of the people who are anti our livestock farming business in this country are the people who are peddling misinformation. That has to stop. And a key thing I want to emphasise here is the land is yours, the farmers of Ireland. It's not theirs. And that's a principle that people died for more than 100 years ago. And we need our representatives in the European Parliament to start from that position.
So I suppose one of the elements of this that interests me personally is that we've had several citizens' assemblies on issues like this. There was one on biodiversity just last year, and some of the results of the citizens' assemblies votes were not exactly what you would expect. So, for example, the turf ban was immensely unpopular in many parts of the country, as we know. In fact, there were even government TDs who were saying privately in meetings that this could potentially bring down the government. It was so unpopular. It was that serious, and they were giving out to Eamon Ryan for driving ahead with it so insistently. And yet, within the Citizens' Assembly on biodiversity, when they had a vote on should turf be banned, the vast majority of people who were in attendance supported it. So that would, to me, indicate that there might be a disconnect here between how representative a body like the Citizens' Assembly is compared to the sentiment on the ground with the general public. Would you have any particular view on how the government is maybe forming a consensus around some of these issues that they're promoting?
So I met a lady while I was canvassing in Rossgrey, paying €900 per month for a very substandard accommodation, not able to heat it, dependent on turf. And she's absolutely furious that her main way of heating her home has been taken away from her. The reality is that the Citizens' Assembly is a disgraceful abrogation of responsibility and elected representatives. What is happening, and I went into the first Citizens' Assembly meeting about the biodiversity, not the actual meeting, the launch of it, and I expressed these concerns that the 100 people there are not representative of people, because by definition, the people who can give up weekend after weekend after weekend does not include people who are trying to rear families, does not include people who have work to do over the weekend, busy people. So by definition, it's not representative. What happens is academic after academic is wheeled in to tell them the right way to think. And this is a serious problem now with citizens' assemblies. We as a representative, in my previous job as a representative of farmers who had real insights into biodiversity and agriculture, were allowed one speaker for 1.5 hour, but there was weekend after weekend after weekend of people, academics, sent in to make sure that they had right think coming out of this citizens' assembly. And something as complex as agriculture policy and the relationship with biodiversity has a huge amount of unforeseen side consequences, a huge amount of consequences and economic impact on funding. And it is ludicrous to think that a selection of 100 people, some of whom are motivated by ideology to attend, can make decisions which is driving policy now. That's government, taking the sneaky way around, dealing with the issue by deep engagement with the practitioners on the ground, and the Citizens' Assembly is not fit for purpose.
Last question, because you've been very generous with your time. I appreciate it. When it comes to what you've said about how the European Union is driving a lot of these policies which are climate-focused, possibly to the detriment of farmers in some people's view, there are probably some who would say, particularly from the government ranks, that it's not healthy or good to create an adversarial relationship with the European Union. Fine Gael, notably, are obviously very much pro-European to the hilt, and they would argue possibly that a party like yours taking a more Euro-critical stance might cause problems for Ireland when it comes to how we interact with Brussels. Do you think that, first of all, Brussels has been good for Ireland and Irish agriculture and these areas, and is it your intent to try and be more pugilistic, I suppose, with the European Union and how we deal with things?
Actually, I did European studies in college 20 years ago. I'm really keen on the European project, but provided that it moves forward in a spirit of deep engagement with the people on the ground. But what's actually happening, and it's not the European Union, it's a number of people in the European Commission who have lost sight of their particular role and now think they're running the show. In particular, I talk about Vice President Timmermans, who laid down the law, and there was nobody in this country to stand up to him. Fine Gael, interestingly, were actually out of tune with the rest of the EPP party when it came to nature restoration law. So don't tell me that Fine Gael were the people on board supporting the European. When it came to it, the Green-led government in this country dictated to our Fine Gael MEPs how they would vote, and they abandoned their colleagues in the European People's Party. So what I fear is that if we continue to have a small, unrepresentative group in the European Commission dictating policy, out of touch with the ordinary people on the ground, we'll actually damage the European project. And I'm the one who's trying to save the European project, because I want it to be based on proper consultation with people, and I want sovereignty to stay with the people where it makes best sense to do it. More local decision making, but where it makes sense to have a common, for example, agricultural policy. That's good. A single European market, very good idea. But only a good idea if we make sure that our producers are not subject to rules and regulations and then undermined by imports from outside of the European Union. That's about a sensible policy to make sure that the next generation of people, including farmers, are supportive of the European project. And it's actually by electing common sense people like Eddie Punch that you will ensure a reasonably good and optimistic future for the European Union. Because if we stay being dictated to by a limited amount of green ideological fanatics, with our government backing that up, we will damage trust in the European Union.